Hey everyone, welcome to chapter 21, the lymphatic system. We're going to get right in and talk about the structures and functions of this organ system. So before we talk about the lymphatic system, let's talk about what our body is composed of. So we have trillions of human cells. So we have a ton of human cells. We all started as a single-celled zygote that underwent multiple mitotic divisions and specializations, making the organism that we see every day in the mirror. But even though we have all of those cells that make up our body, we have more bacterial cells. So in general, for every single cell we have about 10,000 bacterial cells associated with our body. And these cells are actually very beneficial in general. But sometimes, just like anything, these bacterial cells can cause disease. And there's other structures, eukaryotic organisms as well as non-living microbes that can cause disease. And so the lymphatic system is a system that helps not only to move fluids around, but it also functions in helping us to protect us from disease. So what is the lymphatic system composed of? So I have the components down here and then the functions up here. We have a lot of lymphatic vessels, and see these vessels are found in green. They typically run with our blood vessels. So you can see our blood vessels here. There's blood capillaries, and we have lymphatic capillaries associated right with them. These capillaries are going to take in materials and then move to lymphatic vessels that will move to lymphatic ducts and trunks and eventually bring fluid back to the heart. While fluid moves through these vessels, they're going to run into structures called lymphatic nodes, which are organs of the lymphatic system that help to test to see if the fluid is potentially containing any harmful items that could cause disease. Lymphatic system also has certain organs associated with it. So up here, you can't really see it well, but right here would be the thymus, and you can see the thymus much better right there. In an infant, the thymus is going to be much larger. In an adult, the thymus is very small and composed of a lot of fatty tissue. It doesn't have a lot of function in an adult. We have the spleen, which filters blood and checks the actual blood itself for pathogens, just like the lymph nodes check for pathogens in the lymph fluid. And then we have, of course, our bone marrow. Red bone marrow is where all of our cells, blood cells, are produced. The functions then of the lymphatic system, there's two major functions. The first function that we'll talk about is the transport, or I'm sorry, the first major function that we'll talk about is actually the second one on here. The return of fluid from the body tissues to the blood. So lymph picks up about, the lymphatic system picks up about 15% of the fluid that is transported daily, that is filtered out at the capillaries. And isn't reabsorbed. So about 15% of the fluid doesn't get reabsorbed, and that fluid goes into the lymphatic system and is checked for pathogens. The second thing we'll talk about then is the immune system cells and how they fight off infection. So what is lymph? Lymph really is the fluid that leaves the blood that enters the interstitial region and then is picked up by the lymphatic system. So it's the exact same fluid, has pretty much the same consistency as blood plasma because it is the blood plasma that leaves the blood. But once it leaves the blood, it is then called interstitial fluid. And when it is picked up by the lymph, it's called lymphatic fluid. So it's very similar in composition to your interstitial and your plasma. Just depends on where the fluid is, what it's called. Lymphatic capillaries then are what pick up this fluid. And these capillaries have, let me see if I can see, they have little structures, little like valves that allow fluid to move in to the vessels. And so as fluid leaves the blood and enters the interstitial regions, any fluid that is not picked up by the on the venial end of the capillary is going to get picked up by these tiny lymphatic capillaries. So they have these little valves that kind of open, kind of like similar, I would say, to the valves in your heart, your semilunar valves. They open due to the different pressures, but as fluid moves in, the pressure inside the lymphatic capillary becomes larger, and that forces that valve closed. And so fluid moves in a one-way direction, and it's going to move towards the heart. There is no basement membrane on these lymphatic capillaries. It's just these endothelial cells, and so you can kind of see these endothelial cells here, and then see how that's open there. There's like a little opening here. Fluid can move in, but once the pressure changes, then these these cells are going to be forced shut, and then they don't allow for any more fluid to move out or anywhere else. I went way too fast, didn't I? Sorry. Okay, there we go. That's where I want to be. In the GI tract, along the small intestines, we have specialized lymphatic capillaries called galacteals. These specialize in absorbing fat-soluble molecules or lipid-soluble substances that can't be transported through the blood because blood is water-soluble. And so the lymphatic lacteals pick up these fat-soluble substances and move them to the liver, where they can then be broken down and either stored or sent out to do whatever jobs they have to do. The lymphatic vessels then are similar to the structures of your veins. They have the 3 different tunics. They have valves just like your veins do, and they use the skeletal muscle and the respiratory pumps to help move materials towards the heart. But as they move, they're going to move through the lymph nodes at different times. So lymphatic vessels bring fluid from the capillaries to these lymphatic trunks. These trunks then are going to take in the fluid, and they're going to drop materials off into either the right lymphatic duct or the thoracic duct. Those are the largest of the vessels for the lymphatic system. And then the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct will drain fluids, the lymphatic fluid, back into the right subclavian or the left subclavian veins. And so then you have those large ducts that drain into the right or left subclavian veins. And so if you look at this figure here, it shows that the left, or I shouldn't say left, the thoracic duct drains the majority of the body. The right lymphatic duct only drains the head, the right side of the head, the right side of the neck, the right shoulder, right arm, and the right side of the thoracic cavity, whereas the rest of the body is drained by the thoracic duct. So there are certain disorders associated with the lymphatic vessels, and one of those disorders is called lymphedema. Lymphedema is an accumulation of interstitial fluids, typically associated with damage to lymphatic ducts or the not ducts, lymphatic vessels. If the vessels are damaged, then you can't pick up the excess fluids, and then you're going to have that excess fluid pooling in those areas, which is going to cause all kinds of problems with blood pressure and damage to the tissue and organs in that area. There are different types of lymphedema. So lymphedema can be caused by an infection of the lymphatic vessels, tumors. It can be caused by surgery or scarring. If you have to remove any of the lymphatic vessels or nodes, that can cause lymphedema. And there are actually parasitic worms that can also cause lymphedema. And so that form of lymphedema is called elephantiasis. Typically, we control lymphedema using compression garments, exercise, massage. If it's due to infection, then we can remove the infection, and then we can again help to decrease the lymphedema by using those compression garments, exercise, and massage. We would have to kill off the worms or whatever pathogen was causing the infection. So what are some of the primary lymphatic structures versus secondary lymphatic structures? Primary structures are the structures that actually form the lymphocytes that are found in the lymphatic system. And then secondary structures are the areas where those lymphocytes stay and kind of check out the lymph that's moving through to make sure that there's no pathogens associated with that fluid. So for primary lymphatic structures, we have red bone marrow where all blood is formed. And then we have the thymus where T cells go to maturate. For secondary lymphatic structures, we have our lymph nodes, our spleen, our tonsils, lymphatic nodules, included in those nodules, we have mucosal associated lymphatic tissue. And so this is a picture from your textbook that shows both the yellow bone marrow and red bone marrow. The red bone marrow is the site of blood cell formation. That's where those hemocytoblasts are going to be found. And hemocytoblasts are the stem cell that gives rise to all blood. This isn't a great picture. I apologize. It looks better in your textbook. But we have that multipotent hemocytoblast here that undergoes mitosis, forming the individual hemocytoblast that's going to go through and differentiate into either a myeloid or a lymphoid stem cell. And then you produce another multipotent stem cell, right? So we're going to go over to this lymphatic side, and we see that lymphoid stem cell. Lymphoid stem cell produces, differentiates into a lymphoblast, which is a very tiny lymphocyte. That is going to either produce your natural killer cells, which are non-specific lymphocytes, or it forms a small lymphocyte. Small lymphocyte then differentiates into either T lymphocytes or B lymphocytes. Oh, okay. And so again, this is just showing this picture of the red bone marrow where white blood cells are formed, where all blood cells are formed, okay? Hello? Oh, there you go. I was like, in the cartoon, it didn't have a cartoon. So here, there's a cartoon, and I think it's adorable. I found it on Google Images. I don't have the actual website associated with it, but what's going on in this cartoon is we have T cells and B cells. So this is a B cell. This is a helper T cell. Um, Helper T cells have to help activate the B cell. So here we have a B cell that has different receptor proteins. And once it fits a pathogen, it then gets excited. It's like, hey, this one matches. I can take it. A helper T cell helps to co-activate the B cell. The B cell then is going to proliferate into multiple clones of itself and differentiate into either plasma cells, which are up here, or memory cells that remember the pathogen. Plasma cells produce antibodies. Antibodies will then attack those bacteria or viruses or whatever it is that is causing the disease, right? The pathogen. Once they are surrounded by antibodies, then white blood cells, like mainly the macrophages, are going to come along and they're going to eat those pathogens. So antibodies actually make those pathogens easier to eat. That's one function. They also neutralize and inactivate materials. And then memory cells remember. So if that pathogen ever comes back into your system, you're going to have memory cells that will immediately proliferate and differentiate into more plasma cells and more memory cells. And then here's another one. Slowly, there you go. This is another cartoon that I found on Google Images. In this cartoon, an active T lymphocyte is attacking cells that they recognize as infected. And these cells also produce virus, or also produce memory, not virus. So here, T cells attacks body cells that are infected. So here we have a virus infected cell, here we have a bacterium infected cell, and here we have a cancer cell that doesn't have normal surface proteins. So remember, our cells have receptors that or have glycoproteins that are self proteins. Remember those self antigens? You're going to see them on these cells, but these cells will also show non-self, and that's what T cells are going to attack. They are very specific, so they're going to only attack either the virus or the cancer or this bacterium cell, but only a specific one. And they also produce memory when they are activated. I'm going to stop here because I just realized that we went for 18 minutes and I don't like my videos to be too long. So we'll talk about the next structure of the thymus in just a moment, okay? All right, bye.